Good morning, Grid Connections listeners. Welcome back to Grid Connections, the podcast where we explore all things transportation, clean energy, and our power grid connecting all of these systems together. Today, we welcome back Walter Schulze, host of the Network Architect channel, for an in-depth look at how EV charging infrastructure is rapidly evolving. Walter shares his first-hand experience navigating the latest fast-charging networks, from Tesla superchargers to the explosive growth of Pilot Flying J, EVgo, and IONNA. We also dig into why lower-cost EVs like the Chevrolet Equinox EV and upcoming Chevy Bolt will drive a massive demand for public charging, how retail giants like Walmart and Costco are jumping into EV charging to attract more customers, the real economics of fast charging, and why membership plans might be the smartest way to save on road trips, along with the future of plug-and charge technology and why some networks are skipping apps altogether. If you've ever wondered where EV charging is headed next, this episode is packed with real-world insights and expert analysis from our guests today. So don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with someone who's curious about the future of EV charging, and if you enjoyed it, please leave us a quick review. It really does help. Plus, sign up for our brand new Grid Connections newsletter to stay on the top of everything happening in the world of electric vehicles and clean energy. Hit the link in the show notes to learn more about the newsletter and everything we cover in today's episode, along with yesterday's episode where I was on the Coast to Coast Electric Vehicles YouTube live stream talking about all things around the current situation of electric vehicles, Tesla as a brand, and much, much more. It was a great conversation, and Walter was part of the panel as well. So with that, enjoy.
I operate what's called the Network Architect channel, and you would think that'd be computer-based, and initially it was, but it just kind of evolved into other technology, and one of which was my passions was electric vehicles, and that's really where the focus of the channel is now. I operate content that is primarily focused on electric vehicle charging expansion throughout the United States. I think is a good way of characterizing what I've found as my mission here.
I think that is a pretty good summary, but I'm kind of curious. Obviously, as you kind of shared, you do have a bit of the background and more of the traditional IT background, but how did you get involved with this? Or like what was the original inspiration? What kind of got you passionate about electric vehicles?
Sure. We were a internal combustion engine household until my wife got a 2019 Tesla Model 3 long range. And after which it became a curiosity of mine using an electric car in order to take trips. It seemed like such an impossible thing. I didn't even know that was achievable until I got in it and I actually saw the landscape that is the Tesla supercharger network. And without a doubt, it's the gold standard for the user experience for taking a road trip. It's integrated into the car, is optimized for the fastest recharge time, very conveniently located, very ample stall count, dependability. I've never pulled into a Tesla supercharger station that hadn't worked. And it just really opened my eyes. I'm like, this is actually, this is achievable. I can remember one time I took a business trip from Charlotte, North Carolina to Memphis, Tennessee. And it was just the fact that it could be done. You know, it's not the fact that it was might have been a little bit longer. It could be, you can hop in an electric car and you could drive across country and it's not an issue. And that was just a big turning point for me. After which we got a second car, which was a Volvo XC40 Recharge. And we tried to take road trips in it, and its road trip experience was dramatically different from the supercharger experience. And that kind of, as a husband and a self-appointed protector, I started to investigate options for electric vehicle charging just to try to make the road tripping in the Volvo easier. And it takes a lot more planning, at least back in the day, and it still does to some extent, on a CCS station landscape in order to do a road trip. And from there, it just kind of expanded into researching charging stations. And then we got a Cadillac Lyriq, and the Lyriq came with 2 years of free with EVgo. And I'm like, oh, EVgo, let's see where I can go on an EVgo. And it turns out there's lots of expansions and activity going in EVgo as well. So really from there, that was the starting point of where I started to make content from.
And now you have the Lyriq still, and you just got a Chevrolet Equinox, correct?
I did. Yeah, boy, that is a beast. the deals they're putting on those, if you could find one that's 2024 that's still sitting on a lot somewhere, the managers are trying to move those things off their lots in order to make space for the 2025, and they're really discounting. I got like $4,500 off on mine.
Wow. Yeah, I think it was John McElroy that was on here, and he says it doesn't matter how well or how expensive a vehicle is, it will always sell if it's on a dealership.
Yeah.
And it just depends who is going to be the one that has to pay that delta in price.
Yeah, I think I got the favorable outcome there, but you never know when you're the customer at a car dealership whether or not you're making out ahead or not. But it felt like it, and they seem to be good people at my dealership. So
that's great. So I guess that's something a lot of our listeners are always kind of curious about. Like, what have been your experiences when buying an electric vehicle? I mean, Volvo is usually a pretty well-known brand for being a little bit more customer-centric and at least being open to having those conversations from a company that's traditionally had an internal combustion engine background. I'm just kind of curious if you've seen any evolution or if you've had a pretty mostly fortunate experience with the different dealerships you've worked with while buying an EV.
well, the truth is that in our household, really, my wife is the one who makes the automotive buying decisions, and it sounds kind of upside down, but that's just kind of how it is. I'll drive whatever. I really don't care. So she basically buys the new car, and then I get whatever she hands down as a secondary car. And so we'd have to pull her in. Right now, she's chopping up a gourmet dinner out there in the kitchen to ask her what her buying experience was. Actually, the first car I got was the Equinox. That was the one that I actually did for myself. And the reason I did, I'm like, listen, this is a crazy deal. We have to do this. We're going to decrease our monthly payment by $200. We're going to get a new car, and it's even bigger than the XC40 Recharge. And so it just was a very easy decision. So in that case, it was a little bit different. But normally my wife is the one. She's the one who got the Tesla and the Lyriq and the Volvo. And then me, I was the Equinox. And the relationship we have with the current General Motors dealership is very positive. Nice people. They're very friendly, very accommodating. It's very close to our house. And there's a whole question about whether dealers are good or bad. I think that's kind of a mood issue.
Well, in that case, like, what was obviously the price was a big part of it. And I know, just kind of in passing and watching a couple of your videos talking about it, seems like what you'd seen with Tom Bologna and his experience with his own Equinox was part of the reason. But was it really just price, or what was kind of the forcing function that made you go with the Equinox? I just feel like there's a lot of great deals right now when it comes to EVs, especially if you're looking at leasing or kind of trying to take advantage of some of these special rates.
Well, if you look at the Volvo XC40 Recharge, the 2022 has a $150 of charging speed and about 240 EPA range. Now, I was able to squeeze 240 out of it doing like perfect conditions where a couple of days I was not using the HVAC and things like that. But I'm thinking I've lost probably about 5-8% of the range. With the new Equinox, I get over 300, similar charging speed, more car because it's bigger, and less monthly payment. And so for me, that was, why would I not do that? I couldn't think of a reason. I really love the Volvo XC40 Recharge. Very dependable, wickedly fast, very comfortable, kind of a luxe feel to it. That definitely appealed to my characteristics, but that deal was just too good.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And it seems like it has been a pretty positive experience for you just moving into that, and obviously the bigger size and everything. I'm kind of curious, now that you've kind of discussed the different EVs you've moved into and what you've owned, what are, like, looking back this past year, like, what to you's really stood out from the ownership experience when it comes to the EV charging side of it? I know there's been a large, and something you cover so well is kind of the expansion of Pilot, Flying J, and a lot of these kind of more traditionally well-known, essentially gas providers, usually near kind of great locations along highways, interstates. But before we kind of get into that, I was just kind of curious, like, what are you seeing as far as that? What to you is kind of like the outstanding improvements for day-to-day ownership as an EV? Is it sometimes the software? What are some of these things that you kind of just think, like, really make it clear that this is where everything is going? Because that's what I hear from you, understandably, a lot. But I just want to kind of maybe give some of that context for our listeners as well.
Yeah, and I think the primary reason EVs were introduced as a option for purchasing was compliance vehicles in order to help spur improved environmental responsibility. And I don't know if I'm a bad person or not, but I don't use that as a primary purchase decision. Really, what I've always been focused on is the most reliability for my dollar. And back in the day, Mercedes was really the brand to go for if you wanted a really reliable car. You had to pay more for it, but you're going to get a very reliable car. And yes, it was going to cost more to repair when it broke down, but boy, was it it'd keep going for 300,000 miles. Now I can get an Equinox and it's like many times more reliable than the best Mercedes back in the day because there's just so many fewer components. I never go get things repaired. And there's no oil to change. I love the ability of the convenience of charging in my garage. I never go to gas stations anymore. We recently had to bring the car in for a service, the Cadillac Lyriq, and they offered us a loaner. And both me and my wife were like, no, we don't want a gas car. That means we have to go to a gas station. Who does that? Who goes to a gas station to buy gas? You put your credit card in the machine. We don't do that anymore. We get our electricity, we get our fuel from the electricity of the house. So I think that's the number one thing is the convenience and the reliability. For me, the wickedly fast speed is not a element that I'm seeking. It is there, but it's the reliability and the convenience factors.
I don't think I could have said it better myself. I think I was even just anecdotally reminded of that just this past week. We have two EVs and then a classic 87 Land Rover Defender, which is usually what we kind of take the dogs in to go on kind of like mountain hiking adventures. And we were trying to do it, but we were kind of short for time. And we get in and we realize, okay, we have to stop at a gas station. We have to put oil in it and all these things, which that's also kind of the fun of ownership of something kind of like this as a classic vehicle. But when we were pressed on time, you just kind of get spoiled with those things that you forget about. And the unfortunate inconveniences that pros and cons of the combustion world.
Every weekend I used to go to the gas station to fill the tanks up for the week, right? And I haven't done that in years now.
Well, let's go to kind of the main focus of this and kind of discuss your special domain of expertise, which is around just looking at domestic North American EV fast charging. And I'd be just curious, what to you has been the biggest takeaways kind of looking at like 2024 and maybe just even the past year or so of what really has stood out to you as being like the big change and making the non-Tesla realm more approachable for more EV drivers?
It's really been a roller coaster. 2024 has been a wild roller coaster. About halfway through was waiting for the GM switchover to the supercharger so we could finally gain access to it. And shortly thereafter, I became a member with my Volvo for supercharger station charging with the discounted rates where I get the same rates that Tesla owners do. And Volvo came shortly after General Motors. So that was a seminal event because being a former Tesla owner, I know the ubiquity is really what is the gold standard. The reliability is one thing, but it's the ubiquity. It's this fact that there's stations all over. If I have a good count on it, I think it's right around 23 or 2,500 stations throughout North America, Canada, and the United States, not including Mexico, and something like 10,000 stalls. And so always having a stall available at very convenient locations is what is, it's the whole ability to survive a road trip. Like I said, on my trip from Charlotte to Memphis in an electric vehicle, the Tesla supercharger station provides that. And so that was definitely a seminal moment in the non-Tesla realm, is the access. And I know that several OEMs are still waiting for their access, but for us, the transition was General Motors and Volvo, and both of those were big transitions. There's really no way around it. That opened up all kinds of avenues that weren't there before. But also 2024 saw the burgeoning network of Pilot Flying J finally surpass 100 stations. My wife and I were able to travel free of charge in her Cadillac Lyriq from North Carolina to the Grand Canyon National Park and back using just Pilot Flying J stations. We did have to charge at one Electrify America station where there was a bit of a gap in New Mexico. But boy, is that nice. Those are immediately off the Tesla supercharger actually doesn't have anything to compare to those things. Those are right off the interstate. And because it's on the property of the site host that is running the station, and the canopies are built in, and then you just go right in, and the restrooms and other facilities are right there immediately off the interstate. That was such a sweet trip, and the fact that we had 2 years of free with the purchase of the Lyric was just such a delight. It was beautiful weather. Didn't have any problems whatsoever until my wife decided she wanted to go to Roswell, and that was off script. And then we had to quickly find some audible charging stations. Apparently, Roswell, New Mexico, has got quite a bit of charging infrastructure in it. So who would have thunk? But many things are occurring in 2024. I could probably talk for a full 20 minutes, so I'll just kind of leave that as the intro.
Well, let's go a little more in depth. I think that is one of the big themes we've kind of heard on this podcast, is just talking to a lot of people recently about some of the challenges that still remain, but really how quickly those challenges are being improved upon, or even just being removed from the experience altogether, that were kind of a big reason a lot of people were holding back on EVs. I mean, let's kind of dig that a little bit deeper. Like what are some of those for you? Because I think one of the things I also want to talk to you about is the coverage. You're in North Carolina, correct?
I am.
Or,
Yep.
yeah. I'm on the West Coast, kind of in a more rural area. But it is really fascinating to me when I've done kind of, and it's interesting, kind of that area you're talking about. It's like really once you start getting west of the Missouri River, and you can even look at this when you look at a population map, you start getting much less density of population, but the density of DC fast chargers really does change night and day. Like to the east of it, there's so many more chargers and many more beyond just Tesla superchargers. Whereas once you start getting west of it, that's where I've kind of run into most of the issues with my EV road trips. Not that it's ever stranded me or anything, but you do just have to be a little more strategic, even in the Tesla, where you decide you want to charge. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about your experience with that and how you kind of go about with choosing locations for charging.
Well, in the Lyric, it's for sure sticking with EVgo because we have free charging, and why not? And actually, EVgo has done a terrific job of upscaling their network. At one point, they were just a ratty tag network of Nissan funded chargers that were there in order to help with the Leaf initiative, but they've got mad money behind them now. There's the DOE loan, and I was just listening prior to this podcast, the investor relation earnings call for 2024, and I try to stick with the data. The headlines can be a bit sensationalized, and I think the death of the electric vehicle is being reported far too early because the data that I'm looking at is not. In 2024, they saw 116% increase in electrons delivered. And so that is a raw number. We don't have Tesla's numbers because they put the supercharger line items underneath, I believe, other services lumped in with insurance. So we don't actually get the information from Tesla supercharger, but I'd have to assume it's similar. So 116% year over year growth in aggregate throughput. And that 422 number right there is mostly Flying J stalls. And what they're projecting for 2025 is an increase of somewhere between 450 and 550 what they call EVgo extend stalls, as well as they're starting to ramp up with what they call the DOE loan, which is 1.25 billion, of which 75 million has already been dispersed. And so there's questions about whether or not that's even legally possible for the Trump administration to claw that back. But some of the money's already been dispersed, and I think they're going to be getting 75 million every quarter through 2030. And assuming that stays in place, they're going to triple the size of their network and be somewhere around 4,000 stations by 2030, sitting in a very good place. Even if DOE gets pulled, the executive leadership was talking about alternative funding sources because they're one of the few CPOs that is actually getting ready to flip to a net positive margin. For the first time in 2025, they'll actually be earning money, and they attribute that to the utilization of their chargers has increased past 20%. So you have a charger sitting in the ground. On average, their chargers are being used more than about 20% of the time. And so that for them is causing all kinds of different economics that are very positive for them. It decreases the demand charges, and they're able to spread those out. And the other site specific costs associated with leases and whatnot. So they're doing very well, and only bright future ahead for them. And if electric vehicles stop getting sold, they're still fine, because according to the EVgo executive leadership, there's still a gap in the number of cars currently in the population that are demanding charging and the amount of charging that is available. So those two things combined is making their market, they're fine. Even if EVs stop getting sold right now and went to zero, there's still enough EVs on the road in order for them to continue to grow. But that's not going to happen. We all know that's not going to happen. Even if the tax credit is removed, and who knows what else, they put some kind of crazy federal tax on EVs, it's still going to be like my Equinox lease deal. Eventually, we're going to have less expensive cars that are more reliable, and who's not going to choose that?
Yeah, I think this kind of goes to a little bit of what I was alluding to earlier. Just there's been so many reasons for pushback in the past towards EVs, and some of them, to some extent, actually had been pretty reasonable and understandable when it comes to like the actual road tripping of it. But really, with the last few years, we've seen that be finally fleshed out with these different networks, among other reasons. But I completely agree with you. I mean, we're seeing. I think this has been a constant kind of conversation we've had on this podcast, but for like the past year, we've been hearing about how EV demand is drying up, how EV sales are slowing down. Well, when you actually pull apart the data, I mean, some of that has been kind of Tesla's being the larger leader has slowed down a little bit, but the bigger really message to take from that is the fact that when you actually look at the entire auto industry, not just electric vehicles, that is what's slowing down the most. It's not really specifically electric vehicles. There's actually some pretty big deltas in negative growth with a lot of automakers across their whole product fleet, combustion engine, you name it. And so seeing like even, I believe they're still kind of predicting around a 10% for this year of sales domestically, which is still lower than a lot of the other countries for their EV sales. That actually is a pretty big bright spot for those in the automotive industry, given how many headwinds there are just for traditional vehicle sales. And
Yeah, I was going to say somewhere between 10 and 12 is what I've been hearing. And I think it
yeah,
depends on whether or not the tax credit gets axed or not, and what long-term effect that's going to have, and whether or not it's getting absorbed by automakers or if it's getting passed along to the consumer. And, it has to go with the automotive industry. They've got a certain production number. And like what you said with John McElroy, every car gets sold. So, I mean, if they make them, they're going to sell them. So that's really the question of the automakers. And that's a good automaker. I've learned this by watching it, calibrates the number of cars they make to be in line with demand. And boy, is that a tough thing to do, but the good ones do it well.
Yeah. So let's kind of look at, you obviously discussed, and we kind of had that image there from EVgo and some of their projected growth and what we're seeing. I think one of the other big ones, obviously, of last year, and we're starting to see more of, and I'd love to see more on the West Coast, but you've already been to one, is IONNA. And obviously, IONNA is kind of an interesting one because they're trying to go for this kind of higher end experience while EV charging, which has some pros and cons to it. If you're trying to make a business, that's just that much more expense. And obviously, it is a company that's essentially formed by 8 different automakers to try and make EV charging and road tripping that much easier. So I would love to kind of hear your thoughts on the entrance of them and what that kind of sets for a bar for the other EV chargers out there, just across the board around charging experience, and then actually just being a person going in and having the options to access the facilities, and where you think this is all going.
Glad to. And before I do, just talking about the elevated experience, I think there's multiple CPOs that are throwing their hat in the trying to outdo each other game. Like the Tesla Oasis station that's going into California is going to be a big crowd-pleasing Instagrammable station. And EVgo is partnering with General Motors to put in what are known as flagship stations, and BP Pulse is putting in gigahubs. And it seems like every CPO is trying to one up the other one. But IONNA, their claim to fame is that Seth Cutler is one of us. And so when he first was hired, he said he wasn't going to put chargers in the back lot of a shopping mall. That was basically, he's like, we're not going to reproduce the mistakes of the past. We're going to have a customer-centric charging solution for EV drivers that is a place that they want to go and is compelling. Now, as you say, that can be expensive. So we need someone with deep pockets in order to fund this. And apparently the whole concept of the chicken and the egg that has been around for a while, where government stepped in order to fund with public funds in order to get the charging infrastructure rolling, in order to get the technology curve starting to occur where the cost of charging was decreasing and starting to become more advantageous and the business models were acceptable. And that's really where the NEVI program came from. It was that whole mindset that we needed to kickstart this electric vehicle charging infrastructure in order for it to take off. But I think NEVI kind of showed up after it started to take off, which is a little bit ironic, but still glad to have NEVI in whatever form or fashion it ends up in. But IONNA, as you said, showed up here in North Carolina, and I happen to be a North Carolinian. I felt like hitting the lottery when I heard that they were making what's known as RTP, or Research Triangle Park, sometimes also called the New Silicon Valley, their home. And it's also a couple other electric vehicle companies are calling RTP home as well. ChemPower is up there, and VinFast is not too far from there. So it's starting to become a hub for all kinds of different technologies, electric vehicles included. And as a result, I actually crossed paths with a few of the higher ups and was lucky enough to be invited to both the out-of-spec Cars and Coffee and the actual ribbon cutting with the 8 OEMs. So I was able to interview multiple IONNA board members and actually get insight into why they're thinking it's needed. And almost universally, the answer was, we're trying to solve the problems of the past and provide a product for electric vehicle owners that makes a compelling, or gives a compelling answer to charging on the go. And so far, what they've cooked up has definitely solved that problem, but it hasn't solved the problem through focus groups and renderings. They've built stations with such a ferocious speed. It's mind-blowing. They went from October to December, turning the first spade of dirt, to opening a station that was fully baked with all kinds of marketing gimmicks, a local business owner in order to supply coffee and sundries, as well as a QR code integrated access into off hours and restrooms and vending, with top of the line hardware and a 2,500 kVA transformer. To see that all get put in, and a canopy, to see that all put in 2 months was really staggering. They say their claim to fame is that when they issue a press release, it's not for something in the future. They issue a press release saying, hey, we're going to build these stations, and here they are. They're already open. You can go to them. It's right down the street. So that's definitely something different about IONNA, and they call it IONNA Speed.
Yeah, we love to see it. And I think it is pretty impressive in a couple of ways. Obviously, there's a very specific kind of brand style that they're building for these locations that has kind of like almost the kind of traditional retro.
He's a modern retro, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me a lot of what are now the old like gas stations that are, at least you see this quite a bit on the West Coast, that have been kind of turned into usually like cafes and stuff like this. But kind of the aesthetic they're going for, as you can kind of see with this image that I'm sharing right here of the one in Apex, North Carolina, where it kind of offers a lot of service. And I think what's cool is we've seen this more usually in Europe, where there's kind of a main facility where there could be like a vending machine, snacks, and other things that you can access 24/7. Sometimes you have to have a good code. There are other chargers, Tesla ones and others domestically that have these, but they're pretty rare and far in between that have this kind of level of service. And I think it is really a great thing to see more of that just makes, especially when you're on a road trip, having something like this that even while they have some really amazing tech and pretty fast chargers, just something that it doesn't have to be just a quick in and out. It actually gives you a lot of stuff to do. So if you're going to be there for a longer anyways, then you got plenty of options.
Yeah, a couple of things there. Interstate 70 through central Kansas and Missouri is a pretty tough place to go with an electric vehicle, and that seems to be one of the places they've set their sights on. And a couple of locations, they're calling out quirky things about the locations they're building into, like the largest easel in the world and the largest belt buckle in the world. And so I think they're trying to revitalize that whole concept of a road trip, a retro road trip on 66, or that kind of a vibe back from the 50s and 60s. But as you say, some basic amenities. And you and I, as older gentlemen, don't really have the same concern about safety, but a lot of the ladies will say that one of the main things that they want as a basic amenity is some form of lighting or some form of attendant for safety purposes. And in the back lot of a Walmart, they don't feel that. So that's one of the things that IONNA has provided is well-lit, canopy-covered stations that are attached to a facility that's open. So not only can you go in and use the restroom, but it's also a safe location in a part of town that is going to be accommodating and staffed a good portion of the time. On the times that it's not staffed, at least you'll have QR code entrance into the facility, and it'll have some form of security associated with it in that respect. So they've definitely thought through what is basic facilities that a electric vehicle owner would want while they're charging, because while you're there, you're going to be there for 20 minutes. And one of the other things that they have found most electric vehicle owners want are pet-friendly amenities. And so their stations also always carry with them pet-friendly amenity as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out. I mean, it's definitely adding not just the safety and security by being a well-lit area instead of being behind a business sometimes. And the best case, I've been doing this long enough, and same with you, where you just see some sketchy things, and it's just like, if I didn't have to charge, there's no way in hell you would pay me to be here. And so it's really great to just see that and that finally being taken care of and that experience and being improved. And in all fairness, I could definitely say the same with some gas stations I've stopped at over the years. But I think the more proactive that these companies can be about that, the better. So I think another thing that's really interesting about all this is we've been talking a lot about the infrastructure and the cars themselves, but usually kind of the connective tissue of this is kind of that software layer. And one of the things that I really love about IONNA is they're trying to make it as easy really as it can be to charge at these places instead of requiring the app or some of these other experiences that really are, in my opinion, not just subpar, but can be really big turnoffs for people who are new to EVs. Or let's face it, there are people who are buying EVs that may not want a Tesla Rivian that is so tech forward, and they just need something that they can get from point A to point B. And having something that's as easy as swiping your card to buy and charge versus having to pull out an app, download all this stuff, I think is another really welcome thing I love seeing with their approach to trying to make this as easy as possible.
Yeah, and that's one of the first things I asked. There was an event at the Alpitronic headquarters, and I could probably branch off into Alpitronic here in a second, but they're headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina, not in Research Triangle Park, but in Charlotte, North Carolina. And there was a test associated with Alpitronic hyperchargers with IONNA representatives where they're doing a bit of a case study and focus group sort of thing. And the first thing I asked when I had an opportunity to speak to someone at IONNA is, how's the app coming? And the answer was, we don't have one. There's no app. And they don't seem overly motivated either to get one.
Yeah.
So I think their intention is, as you referred, I recently got a Chevrolet Equinox 2024 EV 2RS. And one of the first things I noticed when I went to go program in my charge point operators is at the bottom is IONNA. It's Tesla Supercharger and IONNA. Right now, those are the two that are kind of grayed out. And I've got, EVgo, EV Connect, Charge Point, and then the other two, IONNA and Tesla Supercharger. I think what the intention is to just bake it into all the OEM center consoles, so you don't, why do I need an app? All the
Exactly.
OEMs are already going to have it baked into the center console. And they just announced through a press release that through HubJack, they're going to be doing ISO 15118-2 in order for plug and charge. So it'll just be you show up, you could either use your center console or you could just plug in and initially and automatically start charging that way as well. So I don't even think, I would say, we're already into the point now where I forgot how many. I think it's close to 8 stations are open, and they've got 100 under contract. We've got all kinds of more ones spotted under construction, and there's no app yet, nor is there any announcement of an app coming. I would say we could very easily see July of this year before there's even mention of an app.
Yeah, and I think I'm pretty big when it comes to stop making apps. Just make this easy. I think plug and charge is the solution, and all you really need if you're halfway good at it is just have a backend API that, as you said, the infotainment of these different automakers, or if you want to use a ChargeWay or a PlugShare, some other app specifically for just general EV road tripping, can pull from, so if the site is live, which ones are live, and then even the speed of the actual chargers. Because to be honest with you, that's really, it'd be ideal if a lot of people learned that, but there's a lot of things that'd be ideal if a lot of people knew about. And I think people just want to have an easy, seamless EV driving experience. And I think this really is going to be the thing that really allows it, is make the difficult technical part disappear into the background and make the actual road trip and drive easier for the driver. Don't focus on trying to overeducate them on. I mean, it's hard. I can't believe how many, and you see this, Walter, how many actual press releases of these companies, some of them that even build the damn chargers, that say kilowatt and versus kilowatt hour, and don't even get that correct. So if the actual companies making these products aren't able to get that correct, why are we trying to push that on to the consumer? Sorry, had to slip in a little rant there.
I do see that as well on occasion, and I have to admit I occasionally brain fart them in my conversations as well. Normally I'm pretty good at it now. I've weeded it out.
I think it's one thing if you kind of say it as like you accidentally slip it or say something like that. It's one thing when it's like a press release from a company making these things. Yeah.
But I would say kudos to Elon Musk for the visionary foresight to predict that the need for the DC fast chargers was going to be where it is now, and he directed his team to constantly stay ahead of it with a economic component of the sale of each one of the Tesla vehicles in order to put more chargers in the ground. As I understand, that's how Tesla operates. And I know right now he's a bit of a touch point for people. I don't watch the news, so I don't really know too much about what's going on. I purposefully prune news out of my life. I find it a bit of a waste of time, but anyway,
I don't disagree.
the other car companies have now got religion, and they're now sinking mad money in it as well. So the people with very large checkbooks are now writing checks to put DC fast chargers in the ground. And that's really the whole point of what I do on my YouTube channel is let's get all the headlines away. Who's spending money and where is this money going? And the answer
is actually delivering results, which is something your show does really well.
Yeah. Where, if the thought was that electric vehicles are going to cease being attractive and be pulled back, and we're all going to go back to internal combustion engines, there wouldn't be $20 billion. And that's about what I'm tracking right now, about $20 billion getting ready to be invested into North American DC fast charging by companies like BMW, General Motors. These are car companies, and they're taking money out of their balance sheet and they're spending it on DC fast chargers. General Motors in particular is spending money in like 3 different ways. They've got a partnership with ChargePoint where they're just basically giving money away. They've got a partnership with Pilot Flying J saying, tell you what, we'll pay for the chargers. You guys just host it. They're like, okay, and then they've got a partnership directly with EVgo where they're like, tell you what, we'll buy these chargers. You just put them in the ground and operate them. And in 2025, we're supposed to see the first of what are known as flagship locations from the General Motors builds at EVgo with canopies, lit canopies, security cameras, 20 stalls, pull through, all kinds of crazy stuff. And so that to me is really the telling point of what the channel is trying to get across, plus the practicality of being able to see new charging stations in your area, because it's a very exciting time to be alive. I don't know if anyone else is catching the same thing that I am, is that we're in the process of being a frog boiled in a pot of water. It's happening all around us. And, it's Tesla doing their thing, and then it's the OEMs doing their thing, and then there's independent CPOs doing their thing, but everyone's doing their thing, and it's happening. It's happening very fast.
No, I think that's a great call out. And these changes we're seeing really aren't, I think for a long time it either felt really slow or linear. And now it no longer feels like that is the case. That there's truly a clear rate of acceleration of all of these new sites going in, new products being brought to the market, and then actually different parts of the market actually finding a way to implement this technology to make it as easy for the consumer to really kind of go to this step into electrification. And I realized we could kind of talk about this, and I do love what your show does such a great job of just like being straight to the facts of what happened last week, where things are, and how this stands in the domestic market. But I think it'd be worth kind of talking with you now that we've kind of looked back about how much has changed over the past year, just kind of moving forward. I mean, obviously the big thing, we've talked about this a lot on the podcast too, is just around the changes of NEVI, and good or bad, I think either way, is it something that could help? Sure. But it's clear, even with what we're saying, that the acceleration fact, it's just happening either way with EVs and EV charging. But I'd like to just kind of hear your kind of perspective and takes on how these things are changing, what's really standing out to you, especially with all the noise, and what is kind of that signal that you're looking to really highlight how this is moving in a positive direction.
In 2023, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory did a study on what would be necessary for electric vehicle charging in the United States and Canada, assuming three different trajectory of adoption rates of electric vehicles. I think they called it the median, the high level, and the low level, something similar to that. And according to them, really the inflection point is when lower cost EVs start to become available, which is where we are now. The reason why that's important is because, what is it, 60, I got the number here, 65% of DC fast charger utilization in 2030 will be used by people in multi-tenant dwellings, assuming there's not sufficient level 2 charging at those places. So what that means is that when you get lower cost EVs getting into the hands of people who live in apartments, the need for DC fast chargers dramatically increases. So it's not linear, and it doesn't track what they call
That's a good point.
the number of electric vehicles. It's not a linear tracking. It's what happens is when you get lower costs, all of a sudden the need for DC fast chargers starts to dramatically increase. And in my opinion, we're at that point now, because not only do I have in my garage such an example of an inexpensive EV, which is at the bottom of the Chevy line of vehicles. Like, you walk into a Chevy dealership, the Equinox is basically down towards the bottom of the line of options that you could choose from, and you can get it in electric. Not only can you get it in electric, you can get it in electric at a damn good deal. However, later this year, get ready, buckle up, Chevy Bolt V2 or Boltium, whatever you want to call it, is coming into the market, and that's going to sell gangbusters. And Tesla is constantly advertising, coming out with their low-cost EV, and Kia is coming out with their low-cost EV, and everyone's coming out with a low-cost EV. And what that's going to cause is a very dramatic spike in the demand for DC fast chargers, according to the National Renewable Energy Laboratory's 2023 study.
Yeah, I think that is definitely a great call out about, while we've been seeing, this is one of those great things about, I think, the EV space, where you can't really make predictions looking on the data previously. There is going to be a big change, especially when you get more of these lower cost EVs onto the roads. And I think that's one of the really interesting things about this year that I'm hopeful for. Hopefully Tesla releases the lower price thing. They keep saying that's going to come out this year. I'm hoping the Bolt in this generation is also successful. I mean, it really does start kind of removing the And this is what's also so fascinating, I think, is right now, even let's take EVs out of this and go back a step. The automotive market, the average transaction for a new vehicle, gas, electric, plug-in hybrid, you name it, is around $45,000. I can't remember where it is exactly, but it's really damn high. And this also kind of goes to the point of why I think what's more fascinating these days is actually the used car market and seeing how electric vehicle adoption and that is kind of playing out, and really hope that that continues. But by having so many more of these kind of lower cost EVs come to the market, it really starts going under not just the sale point for an EV, but pretty significantly under the combustion engine new vehicle price, and really starts bringing, I think, one of the concerns that more in the traditional automotive industry have had is like, you really need a good national sales point of about 16 or over 16 million vehicles a year. And with the starting price of so many vehicles getting that high, it is not only just forcing people out, it's also making the used car market more competitive and holding on to vehicles longer. So those vehicles are actually usually in worse shape. So by having so many more of these entrants in the EV space kind of coming at this lower price point, one, it's kind of getting rid of a lot of the rumors and kind of myths that EVs are so much more expensive. Can they be? Yes. But it's usually when you look at the product line and similar trims and all these things, especially performance-wise.
Yeah, because they're top. Top is top tech. People want the top tech,
and also that for sure. But I think that's one of the really exciting things, and I'm kind of curious what your thoughts. I mean, so much of what you cover is around DC fast charging. What is some of the stuff that, I mean, especially kind of talk about multifamily and apartments, are there any things that you're seeing around kind of level 2 or even level 1 charging or new technology in that space that has you kind of really excited for what's coming out and what's moving forward to avoid some of these headaches we might be running into if we assume everyone has to go to DC fast charging at that lower price tier?
Well, I have heard that parking decks in certain municipalities have requirements for DC fast chargers to be put in place. And there's also additional requirements in the state of California for a certain number of AC charging ports to be put in, and AC charging ports when there's net new apartment or multi-tenant dwellings getting put in place. So they seem to be solving the problem that way, but those are only net new. There's,
Fair.
Decades of existing that are going to be problematic, and those people are going to need to find places to charge. As far as level 2 goes, I'm a big fan. I like to ABC myself, always be charging. I find it is actually not. I'm not always charging though, because I typically always have a full battery. I go to and from work on a train, and it's a very short commute to the station, and I just don't really need that unless I'm going on a road trip. I normally don't have to charge outside of my house, and for people who are in multi-tenant dwellings who do, I think the thought of how much time you have to spend at a charger is exaggerated, and I think that's a human reaction to something that looks to be an inconvenience. My personal opinion is not that much of time. I mean, I can't say because I've never lived in an apartment and lived with an electric vehicle that I wasn't able to charge at home. But they just put in a Tesla supercharger near an apartment block near us, and the thing is always full. And people fill up. They go to the Starbucks that's immediately attached to it. They go to the restroom. They get themselves a cup of Joe, and they go on into work, or they're coming home, and then they go home and eat dinner. And it's basically 20 minutes out of their day maximum. So honestly, I don't know what the answer is. According to the National Renewable Energies Laboratory, that was going to be a good portion of the solution, but they didn't have a clear path for how to require it. And I know in Norway, necessity is the mother of invention. So once you have a problem, there's solutions that are presented. In the case of Norway, it came in the form of what's called right to charge laws. I don't know if you've heard of those, where apartment owners are not allowed to tell people they can't drape extension cords across the grass to charge their cars. So what that does is it incentivizes the apartment owner to put in chargers in order to prevent cables from being draped across their property. So I don't know if that's the solution or not. And it definitely is something of concern. But I think people are going to figure out when they have a low cost, dependable car that will get them to where they need to go, and they don't have fluctuations in energy cost in order to fuel the car. And, there's no Middle
Well,
East war that will get in the way.
I do want to kind of bring something up, because this is actually one of the things you do track on your show too, is kind of the cost of DC fast charging.
Mm-hmm.
As you mentioned, yeah, for sure. If you can charge at home or level 1, level 2, it's so much cheaper than buying for gas. But we have been kind of seeing a lot of trends about the cost of fast charging. And I'm kind of
Mm-hmm.
curious on your thoughts of that, of how you see that as do you think that's short term? Do you think that's just going to be the new normal? I mean, we get a lot of reports now, people saying that doing a road trip in EV now is more expensive. Obviously, you start getting into the use cases like such as yourself, and I even have a bunch of Tesla credits with my car, where it's like, well, yeah, I've got a free charging, so I can kind of get around that. But for those who don't, and maybe as some of these incentives for the charging goes away, how do you see that playing out, as far as, especially for like people in multifamily that may have to DC fast charge more?
Yeah, well, it's an unfortunate reality that taking a road trip in an electric vehicle costs significantly more than it does in a gas car. That's just reality. And the way I factor the math is, if you have a 30-mile MPG car up against a electric vehicle that can go 3 miles on a kilowatt hour of energy, you take the cost of the kilowatt hour and you move the decimal point one position over. So if it's 50 cents per kilowatt hour, that's equivalent to $5 for a gallon of gas. And that's the way that math works. And so $5 for a gallon of gas, wow, that's pretty darn expensive. Who would do that? And the answer is people who could charge at home would do that, because I only do that on road trips. And when I'm at home, I'm spending $1.20 for a gallon of gas. So most of the time, that's what I'm doing. So I seek out ways of spending less. And truth is, I'm pretty cost conscious when I do road tripping. And that's one of the reasons why I look for a CPO that has a membership. The Tesla Supercharger was the last one that I chose. And I've recently chose to end my membership there. And I'm looking for someone else, either Electrify America or EVgo, that has very compelling rates. But recently, there's been a bit of price war going on. Tesla dropped their prices. And recently, Mercedes-Benz announced welcome pricing dropping down to 40 cents. And they have the really fast 400 kilowatt Alpitronic hyperchargers. And who else? IONNA is playing with some time of use pricing. We're not really sure long term what their pricing is going to be, but there looks to be some kind of time of use pricing coming out of them as well. No memberships. And I did ask them about that. And I don't think they're going to have membership pricing at IONNA, but there does seem to be some kind of price war. And I don't think Rivian got the memo, because they went in the opposite direction really quick. I don't know. Maybe they're looking at it upside down. They're like, oh, we're supposed to drop our prices. Whoops. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I guess for any of those who are listening, what in and they're fiscally trying to pinch the pennies while charging or going on an EV road trip, is it Tesla, or what are usually the ones you've found with what you're tracking to probably be the most cost effective if you do get a membership with them right now?
EVgo or Tesla, one
Yeah.
of the two. And it depends on who works for you. In my particular case, because I have a Chevrolet Equinox EV with a charge port in the back of the driver quarter panel, it's a bit of a stretch to reach a V3 dispenser. Now, everyone says it's not a problem. Don't worry about it. Just know it's a problem. I got to get damn close. If I sneeze at the wrong time, I'm hitting a bollard. So for me, that's one of the main reasons why I dropped Tesla Supercharger memberships, just because more than half of the stations I go to are the shorter cables. And I could do a sideways thing, but then I'm taking up 3 stalls and I want to be polite. So I could find other alternatives. But so cost consciousness, I'd say find a way of charging level 1, which is a perfectly viable alternative.
Yeah.
Level 1 you can get by just fine. In fact, I hear most people in Europe and Australia who just travel around town typically only do recharging level 1, and only do DC fast charging when you're doing a road trip, unless you
Yeah.
can get a membership and charge off hours.
I think that's a great call. I've actually, we've been having to use a rental for where we're living recently more often. And I completely agree with you that while we've been level 1 charging, it's worked way more than I thought it would. I think the bigger takeaway to me is this is why it's so important to have efficient EVs. because once again, you start like you're kind of talking about. If you figure you're going 3 miles per kilowatt hour, then you're looking at $5 a gallon. I've been doing pretty close to a little over 4, which even blows my mind. And I'm not trying to
Is it Model
drive
3?
in the Model 3 and even our Y lately. I was kind of surprised by. And I think that's just such an underrated thing. And I know Tesla's the only one kind of putting a focus on this, but it's something I would love to see more of the domestic EV automakers kind of double down on, because there is this kind of I agree. Teslas don't have the best charging curve right now. I would love to see that improved as well. But because they're so efficient, they actually kind of hack the system. And while their actual curve and charging rate isn't that fast, it's because they can go so far on what's being put in. And I'm sure this will change, and we'll see this from more automakers. But and honestly, that was one of the things I didn't love the styling of a lot of Mercedes EVs, but that was kind of because they were putting such a high focus on aero efficiency and trying to reclaim some of that efficiency in their vehicles, that I realize there's a balance with. But I think that's one of the big things that, especially for people who are going to be charging on level 1 or level 2 more, efficiency is such an honestly, efficiency and range are my two biggest metrics for an EV, because even to what we're talking about, DC fast charging makes up such a bit of day-to-day life with an EV for most people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're cost conscious, looking for an efficient electric vehicle is definitely the way to go. And I understand Kia's definitely got some that the direct coefficient is way down there, close to the Model 3, from what I understand. And if you wish to look for a path to decreasing household budget by lowering your fuel costs, efficient EVs are an option to consider. For me, I don't know. I don't look at it that way. For me, it's really the overall convenience factor and reliability. As I said, just a rock solid car. You get in it and it starts. I never have to worry about the mystery fluid on the floor of the garage on a Tuesday morning disrupting my week.
If you're dealing with that, you're having a big issue. I mean, it's probably going to be coolant.
That's right.
It's probably a coolant issue, but yeah, that is pretty rare for an EV.
And I do think one of the things,
no matter what it is, you're having a bad day at that point.
I do think one of the things that is going to be a positive side effect that's going to dramatically increase electric vehicle adoption as a result of all the CPOs kind of trying to vie up against one of each other. IONNA's got these things called beacon rechargeries that are going to be like the really large 30 stall canopy, every trimming you could possibly want in the center of a metro somewhere, fireworks going off in the background or who knows what is, people are going to notice those,
Yeah.
Walmart is putting DC fast chargers in their stores. They've announced it, and it's been kind of like a stale announcement for a while, but now they're actually doing it. It's actually happening, and nothing can advertise that EVs are here to stay more than all day, every day. The supercenter in your neighborhood has 8 Alpitronic hyperchargers in the parking lot, painted with Walmart wrapping, and cars sitting there charging. And then you go in and you get your sundries, and on your way out, you're like, why don't I have one of those electric cars? And then you start looking at it, the curiosity of it, and then you realize there's low cost EVs available. And I can come here, and apparently Walmart's going to have a pretty compelling rate for their charging network. And Pilot Flying J, those are all over the interstate, and people are all day, every day coming in to get gas, and they look over and they see this big canopy, and it's advertising electric vehicles kind of covertly. And there's someone there sitting there wiping their windshield with a windshield cleaner and charging up their electric vehicle. And the person's thinking, why am I driving this car that keeps breaking down when I can get one of those electric vehicles? And I think that's going to, the pervasiveness of the expansion of DC fast chargers of many different flavors. Like I saw on LinkedIn today, someone passing by a 40 stall Tesla supercharger that's getting ready to be lit. And he was all excited, so he put it on LinkedIn. And, this thing was like
there's got that snowball effect where it starts as just one little thing. And I think that's always been true of EVs. And it's continued to be, I think there's even been some people in the EV community that have voiced that the idea of getting butts and seats in EVs is no longer as important as it used to be. And I actually am more and more convinced that is far from the case. It's actually quite the opposite. I think the more people get behind EVs, the more you just see that kind of snowball effect, because then they become somebody on a cul-de-sac that has an EV. Their neighbor sees like, well, if Joe can do it, and Joe's kind of an idiot, I can do an EV for sure. And I mean, that's a bad example, but that has traditionally been how this kind of starts. And I mean, that was a big part of the kind of tactic for a lot of the EV startups domestically. And it seems to be that is probably still the most effective way for a lot of the players in the space to actually get EVs on the road. And I think that's a great call out about Walmart. I mean, we're seeing a lot of Costco's now even put in EV fast chargers, and I actually know a couple of the people who work on the Walmart team for the EVs fast charge, so we should probably have them on here. But you're right. There become a lot of talk, kind of some press releases about it. But the people who are working behind that are serious people and want to see that kind of roll out. And I think more of those things and seeing like, okay, maybe I don't have to drive to the Costco, get the gas, and then go in the Costco and get whatever I need. I can just park it, charge it, go and get Costco and get whatever I need, and then by the time I leave, it's charged anyway. There is a little bit of a depending if you're not able to charge at home and all this stuff, and some of that mental kind of gymnastics have to change a little bit. But with the just addition of having so many more of these places be so frequent and accessible, and just the visibility of it, a lot of those worries start to go away pretty quickly. So I'm also very excited for that. I guess I realize. Oh, is there something you want to add there, Walter?
Just very quickly, yeah, and
Yeah,
the cascading effect that's going to happen here. The people at Walmart are not doing this because they're civically conscious and trying to altruistically contribute to the greater good of society. They're ruthless capitalists, is what they are. They're trying to figure out how their brand can be distinguished from Amazon. And one of the things that Amazon can't do is they can't put EV chargers in their parking lot because they don't have any parking lots, right?
that's fair. That's a good
And
point.
so if Walmart can drag more customers back to their stores by putting in an electric vehicle chargers, and it makes economic sense, they're not going to be the only ones who come up with this bright idea, and then it just starts cascading to every major retailer out there realizes that it's called monetizing dwell time is, I believe, the term
Exactly.
that has been coined for that. And once it becomes an economic decision that has viability to it, it just starts cascading everywhere.
No, I think that's a great call out, and I realize we've kind of hit the 1 hour mark. But real quickly, Walter, I'm just curious for those listeners. Do you have any upcoming EV trips, road trips yourself planned for the year? Or
My wife does. She's a school teacher, and spring break's getting close, so she's going to go visit her friend in Florida.
oh,
And
nice.
fortunately, Pilot Flying J has completely built out her route. In fact, they built out so many stations that she'll be driving by free Pilot Flying J stations that she doesn't need to stop at because there's going to be another one 20 miles down the road. And she'll choose the ones that either has canopies if it's raining or is closer to wherever she wants to go. So that's happening. Her lyric is all fueled up and ready to go. Once the weekend hits, that's when her spring break is available. I kind of burned a couple of. I switched jobs, and you only get 2 weeks as the new employee
Uh,
in my industry, so I don't have as much free time as I did previously. But I do a lot of car camping. That's kind of my thing, and being able to run the environment inside a car is something that's definitely advantageous in an EV. So that's definitely something I'm passionate about. So I do weekend car camping trips, and here in North Carolina, there's plenty picturesque spots to choose from.
no, that's great. I definitely want to get the updates on that. Have you done that yet in the Equinox or just the Lyric?
Not yet. No, I had my
Gotcha.
whole car camping kit specifically designed for the Volvo XC40 Recharge, which should be pretty portable because the mattress that I use, I heard someone say what you want to do because you can get the custom mattresses for
Yeah.
like Tesla. Tesla has some custom mattresses and a few other have custom mattresses, but something called a nap mat that the kids sleep on when they take naps.
Right, right, right.
It doesn't deflate. It's the perfect thing, and it fits well in the back of the car. So that's what I use in my car camping setup. It should work pretty well in the Equinox.
Well, perfect. Well, Walter, I just want to say thank you again for coming on this week.
It's been a
Definitely
pleasure.
want to talk with you and the rest of the Coast to Coast EV team soon. I know, I guess when this goes live, we'll have just finished last night's episode,
Get ready for it.
Wednesday night. Yeah, so that'll be a fun conversation, and there will be links to that as well as Walter's own site and more in today's show notes. But Walter, thanks again for coming on, and we'll have to have you back on soon again.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Chase.
That's a wrap on this week's Grid Connections. Huge thanks again to Walter Schulze for joining us and breaking down the latest in electric vehicle charging expansion. From IONNA's rapid station rollouts to the price wars happening in fast charging, it's clear that the EV landscape is shifting fast, and if you're paying attention, there's never been a better time to drive electric. Also, please check out last night's episode of Coast to Coast EVs, where I, along with Walter, were guests discussing the current happenings in the world of electric vehicles and much more. What was your biggest takeaway from today's episode? Let us know in the comments and share this episode with a friend who's curious about electric vehicles. If you enjoyed the conversation, do us a favor. Share this episode with at least one person who would love it too. Also, leave a quick review on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps others find the show. Plus, let's stay plugged in. Sign up for our new Grid Connections newsletter. Link in today's show notes to get the latest insights on electric vehicles, charging, and clean energy trends. And until next week, this is the Grid Connections podcast signing off.